Okay, hello. Today it's going to be all about fantasy maps. I'm going to be looking at some of my favorite ones and a few other ones notable for certain reasons. If you fancy watching that, stick around. I'll be with you in a second. Okay, welcome back. Right, before I get on to the map fun, I'm going to talk about the past week. So if you want to skip ahead, go to there and I'll be with you shortly. For everyone else, right, let's get down to business. As you can hear, I haven't been very well this week. Vanessa had like a cold and I thought I was going to get away with it, but unfortunately it passed over to me and it's gone to my chest. So that's not good. Second. So yeah, but I'm getting over the plague now. It's just made my voice a bit funny. Unfortunately, we booked to go off for a day trip in Cornwall a few weeks before, and unfortunately it fell on the day where I was quite bad. But we decided to go along with it, and we had quite a nice time. But it was raining as well. After all the nice weather we just had, it was raining, and I was coughing and all the time and all that. So, but it was nice. Hopefully a few pictures been popping up. Anyway, the other bit of news is, well, all I've had is a text from my new boss saying that my job's starting next Thursday. So he's gonna, whenever that is, he'll call me up and we'll talk about this new route that I'll be doing, taking whoever it is to school for the rest of the year. So I've got no idea who that's going to be or where it's going to be, how long the drive's going to be either, or whether we'll need an escort along with us and who that might be. So I'll tell you next week because I'll have done one day by then. Yeah. Right, okay. So because of the illness, I've done absolutely nothing this week. I don't think, no, nothing at all. So I thought today I'll just talk a little bit about fantasy maps in general. I know last week I showed you how I went about making the map for my previous book. So I thought I'd go through some maps that I like from my childhood or my teenage years, and other ones that I've discovered since, and even some books that I think could have maps but they don't have them. So first of all, why even have maps in fantasy books, and why is it a thing? Why do maps appear in fantasy worlds? Well, for me, I mean, I don't know the reasoning why. I think a lot of people just jump on the idea that a fantasy book should have a map, and I think a lot of people, I think some maps appear in books that don't really need them necessarily. I'll mention one a bit later where that's the case. But in other ways, I think even for books that don't actually necessarily need one, it gives a kind of, for me, it gives a stamp of authenticity, a visual means of navigating this imaginary space. When I was in my young teens, when I was a child even, I struggled to read. I had a problem with reading. And so I've always been more visually stimulated by things. And so if a book had a terrible front cover, I wouldn't read it. Or if it had no cover at all, forget about it. And I think a lot of us influenced, even now, about whether a cover's good or not. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover and all that, but we all do. And so these maps were also, when I found these fantasy novels with maps, it was another way into a book. It grounded me. I could begin a story and think, oh my, yeah, right, okay, I'm there, and I could look on the map, and I kind of knew where I was. It gave me a starting point. Now it's not like that so much for me. It's more about seeing the world that's beyond what you're reading as well. So it's almost as though it actually exists. The more realistic, the better in some respects. Okay, so the first example I'm gonna pull up is this map, which is by which appears in the Inheritance Cycle, written by Christopher Paolini. I've never actually read any of these books. I think my brother and sister have. They've told me about it. I'm not really interested in. I've heard about it. It's not really my kind of thing. But the map is amazing. So if I had discovered this book maybe as a teenager and I saw that map, my goodness, I would have been on it. I've seen. You can have a look on YouTube. This chap talks about how he went about making it, and he drew it himself. It's done in pencil. It appears to be pencil or graphite or whatever, quite a dark pencil if it is pencil, and it's really, really detailed. So I absolutely love that, and you can tell it's hand drawn because it's not consistent. There's lots of variation in it, and the mountains are all different. There's no cutting and pasting going on. This was before, I think, Photoshop was so heavily used for making maps. And there's lots of different places there. The interesting thing is that you've got, I think this is the only map that accompanies the 4 books, but you've got mountains in the south, and you've got a great big forest in the north, and to the west you've got an ocean, another spine of mountains, and in the center a desert. So essentially you've got everything you need there. In traditional fantasy, it's all there in one map, which is quite useful. Create one map and it will suit you for the rest of your rest of the books, however many you end up writing. The one I've done, my map so far is only covering 1.5 books or so, because I didn't want to expand the world too much, because I still don't know what's beyond, and I didn't want to invest too much time creating a whole world and not be writing. So I thought, let's just get on with it. But yeah, that's the advantage of creating what amounts to a whole world in one map. And it's a beauty. Yeah, that's one of the best ones I've seen. But the only one that I'll show you that I haven't actually read the book. There we are. Right, so the second one, sorry. Okay, so Patrick Rothfuss. So Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear, the 2 books that are currently out. He's working on the 3rd one. I'll show you the map as it appears in my book. Well, I'll take a photograph and stick it on there. But as you can see, it's pretty light on details. And for me, when I saw this map, I was quite disappointed, really. There's not a lot going on there. And when you've read the first book, which is just as fat as this, I don't know how many pages, it's quite long. It's over 1,000 pages. You realise that it doesn't really go very far. There's very little travel. And the outside world doesn't really feature at all. Maybe in passing, I can't remember. I read it a long time ago. But I remember finishing and thinking, well, what was the point of the map? I mean, it expands on the world in the way I like it to. You know, it gives a bit more authenticity to the setting. But in this regard, I thought it was, I don't know, it seemed pointless. Saying that, the second book, there's a bit more travel going on, and it goes across the map, and so you can follow it a bit more. The version here that I'm bringing up is a far more detailed version that was made, I think, for the 10-year anniversary of it. As you can see, it's a cracking map. I really like it. There's a lot of detail there. The forests have been meticulously rendered, individual trees and all of that. And the mountains are really lovely as well, all very different. Obviously hand-drawn, but I think perhaps done on Photoshop with a stylus. I can't be entirely sure. I'm pretty sure though. Yeah, the lines are very, very clean. Yeah, so yeah, I don't, and comparing to the other map, there's a lot more places. More places have been added to it, and again, that bear no relevance whatsoever to the first two books. I can only assume a lot of this will feature in the third book. Either that, or it's, I don't know, just, you know, pepping it up a bit. But it's interesting. There's some really interesting places there, and you start thinking, what's going on there, and will it feature? Well, that's a very good question. We don't know. Okay, well, I'll move on. Right, so the rest of these, I've got the actual book, so I'll bring up my own versions of the pictures, right? Down there. Next one. Magician by Raymond E. Feist. Now, this book is important to me because it kind of got me into reading, really. As a teenager, I don't know how old I was, 14, 15. Up to that point, I'd hardly read any books. I probably had never read a novel before. Maybe I had Day the Triffids, I think was the first one by John Wyndham. That was the first one I ever read. But this was a way into fantasy for me. And again, it was the cover. I thought, my goodness, that's a lovely cover. And I just wanted to read it. And the next best thing, of course, would be, yes, it has a map. So I'll bring the map up onto the screen. So this one, it's got two maps. You've got Midkemia, which is the main, which is where it's set in the main. And then you have a map of Kellowan, which is another world that the main character, Pug, discovers through rifts. In terms of the style of the map, I wasn't that keen on it as when I was reading it. It's fairly, I don't know what the word is really, lacking in detail, a little boring in my opinion. It almost looks, I think looking at it now, it has been hand drawn and it's done in ink, but it looks like someone's taken like a tree template and banged them in, or mountain, you bang them in. But I don't think that's the case at all. But at the same time, it doesn't give much to the imagination. But saying that, I loved it. As I was reading it, it started to grow on me because I could follow the journey, and these kind of very, very basic illustrations became a lot more in my mind as to what when I was reading the book as I went along. So I'm very fond of this map, but just because of, yeah, it was an important book for me at the time. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah, it's okay. Brilliant episode, brilliant. Right, okay, next, what have we got? Well, it's got to be Lord of the Rings, of course. J.R. Tolkien. Got this great big version. Got this years ago. And like all of my books, like the one, I mean, like Magician, it's kind of water damaged and it's been read many times. This one also, it looks like it's from another world. I would spend a while in another world. You got this. I let this kind of get this water damage or whatever the hell it is growing inside there. I like that kind of thing. It's beginning to look like old parchment, and yet this was a pristine book when I bought it many years ago. Okay, so normally you get the map in the beginning. In this one, you've got the great big appendix at the back, because Tolkien was, I mean, he absolutely lived it, didn't he? I mean, he created the languages and the runic symbols and all of that, and the history. And of course, he drew his own maps, which are very nice. I'll bring these up again. So here on the first page, he's done a fairly simplified version of the world and then chopped it into 4. And then each of those plates is then rendered in better detail on the next pages. These are lovely maps, got to say. Again, done in pen and ink. And I like it when the forests are, you know, there's a representation of a forest, but it's quite detailed. It sticks out straight away that it's a forest, the mountains, and then all the different places there. And I like the hand-drawn typography as well. I just like that handmade feel. Again, I suppose in my mind it's as though it could have been created by someone there, you know, a very basic form of cartography by a character possibly. And there's a legend there. Yeah, it shows approximately how big the place is in terms of miles. Yeah, and then we've got the water there rendered with these kind of like isobars, like a kind of ordnance survey map almost, but that's for the sea representation of the ocean. And then you've got that very odd mountain range circling Mordor. I think this gets a lot of, I think I've heard negative things said about the mountain ranges in Tolkien's maps. I mean, they don't appear to be, I mean, you've got some of these are great big sweeping spines of mountains that could be the result of tectonic plates meeting. And then you've got the one around Mordor that looks like it's just been plonked down there. And this is an interesting thing in itself in terms of world building. The second map I'm making, I have a similar place that I kind of want protected by mountains. I don't want anyone easily getting into this place. And so these very unusual formations can arise through necessity. But that's the beauty of fantasy. You don't have to follow the laws of nature. You can do whatever the hell you like, within reason. Although I've tried to justify mine in certain ways. So, yeah, who cares? Mordor's surrounded by 3 walls of mountains. Deal with it. Okay, at the very end, we've got an expanded map of, I think it's all 3, yes. You've got Rohan, Gondor, and Mordor in the same area. It's just done in a slightly different style. And again, even more like an ordnance survey map with the mountain ranges done in a kind of topographical way. Again, very nice. So, I mean, at this point, it might be a good idea to talk about hand-drawn versus digital. And increasingly, I see a lot of map making being done on tablets with styluses and all that. And there's some really amazing stuff being created in there. But I find that it's all a little too clean for me. And whilst there is a fair bit of variation in a lot of these maps, obviously it's being hand drawn, but through the medium of the stylus and the tablet. But it's not. Sometimes things are being cut and pasted, you know, some people don't like drawing every single tree there or every single mountain, and so there's a bit of creative. The temptation to cut and paste must be strong, and I've seen ones where it just looks slightly a bit too homogeneous. Everything looks very similar. But saying that, I've seen other examples in digital art that kind of work really well. There's no hard and fast rule. It's another tool. Use it. I've done the same. I've used. I ended up creating mine digitally in the end, although it was from a well, you know, it was just a laborious process. But yeah, for my personal preference is ink on paper and all the little imperfections that might result from that. Okay, I'm going to do one more example, and then I'll talk about a couple of books that I think could have benefited from a map. Okay, so this last one is, well, this is the second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and this is a giant book, and the one before it is equally as large. This is I don't know what you describe it as, high. I think, well, it's high fantasy, but it would probably be lumped into low fantasy because it starts off in the real world, a man that's going into another world. This was a fairly large influence for my own writing, because I'd read books where someone goes from our world into a fantasy world, but this one was believable, and it was really well written, but a difficult read. Slightly turgid at times, I must say. I mean, some of the vocabulary used is incredible. I've never had to use a dictionary so often for words that didn't really need to be used. I don't know. But it's hard going, but it's good. The map, right? Okay, sorry. The map. The map is nice. I like the map in this one. Again, it's kind of ink on paper, obviously hand drawn. No trickery involved. It's all been done line for line, as far as I could tell. Lovely. Again, it could be geologically possible, I suppose, with the mountains there, and you've also got some hills rather than just mountains and forest. Where's the forest? Oh yeah, the forests are delineated by these giant trees. Well, that actually is a giant woods, but otherwise, I think these plains, you know, there's a bit of kind of around the sides of the rivers. There's a bit of dotting. I don't know. Are there any forests there? I don't know. I enjoy following this one, and this one, as much as the maps of Middle Earth in the Tolkien books, it was very, very useful to the story and to know where they were and what was going on. Less so in Patrick Rothfuss's one. And Magician, yeah, it was useful following in that one as well. This one also has a couple of other pictures to help you frame certain areas in your mind. There's a kind of a town there, but again, not in massive detail. And the sandhold gives you an idea of its structure. This is similar to what I've done in my first book, showing the layout of the citadel, because some things are hard to describe in such a way to make it clear in the reader's mind. Sorry, I'm looking at the time here. This is going too far. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly talk about two books by the same author that I think would have been nice to have a map in. And so Clive Barker, absolutely love his writing. And so one book is Imagica, and the other book is Weave World. And both of those were very rich in describing these other worlds, to the point where it was, especially in Imagica, it was describing a kind of a journey, a contiguous journey through certain lands. A map would have been lovely. It would have been amazing. I'm sure they've fans have made maps, and he may have even illustrated a map since then. I don't know, but yeah. So some books would benefit from it, and some have them, and they probably don't really need them. But my general philosophy is just stick a map in there and just see where it goes. Okay, I better stop there now. Next week, it depends how it goes this week. I'm going to start working on my new map, so I may be able to show you a little bit of that, but I don't think I'm going to be able to finish it in time. Anyway, I'll see you all next Friday. Cheerio.